So the subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere will come to order. The purpose of the hearing is to examine the Mexican government's relationship with the countries in the region and to highlight recent State Department and Trump administration actions regarding Mexico and to examine the status of the United States-Mexican relationship today. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Mexico is our closest ally because of its proximity to the United States. They're not going to move neighborhood, neither are we, so we are stuck together. For over 200 years, our relationship has been marked by friction, cooperation, sometimes love, and sometimes not so much love. That is why it's common in Mexico to say and repeat that historical phrase, so far away from God, so close to the United States. Today, the Mexican president has a fantastic opportunity to step up to history and to confront the challenges that both countries face as neighbors: drugs, violence, and tyranny. When it comes to fighting for liberty, Mexico is missing. When it comes to fighting the war on drugs, they can do much more, although we recognize that they are cooperating extensively with the United States. On the political front, the Mexican official line has always been of non-intervention in the affairs of other countries in the Western Hemisphere. But that is really only in theory, not in practice. And the perfect example is Cuba. In the last 4 months, Mexico has sent to the Castro tyranny 55 oil tankers worth more than $3 billion for free. And what's the reason? I don't understand. It only helps the tyranny to continue subjugating the Cuban people. Even worse, violating Chapter 23 of the USMCA, which is the free trade agreement that Mexico has with the United States and with Canada, that specifically prohibits forced labor in the partner countries. Mexico has accepted more than 3,000 Cuban doctors in exchange for over $100 million paid directly to the Cuban regime, not to the doctor themselves. That is pure and simple slavery. And I'm going to explain to you how it works so you will see why this is slavery indeed. The Cuban doctor goes to Mexico and provides a medical service. That Cuban doctor cannot bring his family with him because the Cuban regime is afraid that that Cuban doctor is going to stay in Mexico. The Cuban doctor then receives only 5% of their earnings paid by the Mexican government to the Castro regime. The other 95% of his salary goes directly to the hands of the Castro regime. That is inconceivable. It's like if you're making $100 a month, someone keeps 95% and you're only put in your pocket $5. Really, that's inconceivable. And unfortunately, the Mexican government is complicit of this evil scheme. Why can't they just pay directly to the guy, to the Cuban doctor? Why can't they do that? No, it escapes me. Another unfortunate example is Venezuela. Against all odds, a lady by the name of Maria Corina Machado wins this award called the Nobel Peace Prize, given by the Norwegians, one of the hardest awards in the world to be earned by an individual. When the Mexican government was asked about this distinguished recognition, the response was no comment. So is Mexico with the forces of freedom, or Mexico is with the forces of Nicolás Maduro? Based on no intelligence, the United States know that the coca paste, which is created in Colombia, is now refined by hydrochloric acid in high capacity in labs within the Venezuelan territory, then flown to Honduras, then moved through Mexico before reaching the United States. It is also fair to say that the State Department has confirmed and repeatedly has thanked the Sheinbaum administration for that cooperation that Mexico is giving us at this hour in the drug trafficking war. But Mexico can do a lot more. They can spend more on security. They can improve the timeliness and accuracy of the intelligence they share with the United States. They can capture and put in prison the big mafia bosses of the Jalisco Nueva Generación and the Sinaloa cartel, who, as according to news reports, they walk the streets of Jalisco freely with no consequences. To Mrs. Sheinbaum, the President of Mexico, this is a crucial moment for us as neighbors. Mexico has you, the first female president, who can rise to the challenge of leadership. Mexicans are the largest Hispanic group in the United States. And I, Maria Salazar, representing District Number 27 in Miami, I'm the strongest supporter in the United States Congress of Mexicans with paper and without papers, because I have introduced the Dignity Act, which is to bring out of the shadows millions of the Mexicans immigrants who are in this country, who are working hard, who are giving us their labor, who have not committed a crime, who are very good part of our society and our communities. I want to give them a better life. But I also call on their president, President Sheinbaum, to rise to the challenge, to stand for democracy in Cuba and in Venezuela, and to stand for justice and show a stronger hand when it comes to deadly drugs poisoning both our nations. The Western Hemisphere needs leaders, not bystanders. And Mexico is very important to us not to sit on the sidelines, but to be a powerful neighbor and continue working with us. In place of Ranking Member Castro, who I understand is delayed, I now recognize Mrs. Titus from Nevada for an opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to welcome our guests, too, and I'd like to congratulate both of the witnesses for being the first representatives from the administration to come and speak to this subcommittee all year. So welcome, I guess better late than never. This is the final legislative week of the year, but okay. Now, the Trump administration has claimed in the recent report that they put out and in some rhetoric that the Western Hemisphere is now a priority. So he's just now sending witnesses to come over here and explain to us what that actually means. It's hard for me to kind of understand that. He's also spoken about bringing back the Monroe Doctrine. I'm not sure the president knows what the Monroe Doctrine is and puts it in historical context, but let's look at some of the things that he's doing that might mean the Monroe Doctrine. He wants to take us back maybe to a time when our policy was to protect the hemispheric economy that was based on slave trade from the European powers. Or maybe he's pushing a return to Cold War era U.S. intervention that worked so well, as we know, supported military dictatorships throughout Latin America in Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Guatemala, Haiti, El Salvador. This is a reputation we're still trying to fix today. So I'm not sure what he means by the Monroe Doctrine, but I do know what is happening, and that's that he's unleashing chaos and calamity all across the region. Now, as far as Mexico goes, and I'm curious to hear what y'all have to say about that, that's very important to my district, which is southern Nevada, Las Vegas. It's important to tourism. It's one of the sources of our largest population for tourism. The immigration issue is very important. It and El Salvador are the two countries from which immigrants come the most. It's an important part of the workforce, whether you're talking about construction or back of the house. So it's very important that we have good relations with Mexico. And indeed, we have had over the years good cooperation on a number of issues, whether it was trade or just economics generally or national security issues from both sides. So it's interesting to me that now with a new president, a time to step up for leadership, a time of real opportunity for us, the president instead is talking about taking unilateral action and maybe sending troops into Mexico. I don't really think that's going to help our good relations, and I look forward to hearing what y'all have to say about the Monroe Doctrine and also about this new proposed action, maybe sending land forces into Mexico to deal with the drug problem. So I will yield back and look forward to the ranking member's return and have some questions at that time. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Titus. The other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We're pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this important topic. First, Mrs. Katherine Dueholm is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs of the United States Department of State. Previously, Mrs. Dueholm served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for North America, covering the United States' relationship with Mexico and Canada. She has also served as Deputy Chief of Mission in El Salvador and is a career member of the Senior Foreign Services. We'll also have, and thank you for being here, a distinguished career, and thank you for serving the country up until today. We'll also hear from Mr. Chris Landberg, the Senior Bureau Official of the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs at the United States Department of State. Previously, Mr. Landberg served as INL Director in Bogota, Colombia, and also in the United States embassies in Ecuador, Argentina, and the Dominican Republic, among other countries. He is a career Senior Foreign Service Officer with the rank of Minister Counselor. This committee recognizes the importance of the issues before us and is grateful to have both of you speak in front of us today. Your full statements will be part of the record, and I'll ask you to keep it to 5 minutes in order to allow time for member questions. I now recognize Mr. Dueholm for an opening statement. Thank you once again for being here.
Thank you. Chairwoman Salazar, Ranking Member Castro, Representative Titus, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on U.S.-Mexico relationship as well as Mexico's relationships in the region. Our America First policy includes focusing on improving U.S. national security and economic growth and addressing the needs of our border communities. We share a nearly 2,000-mile border with Mexico, and it is one of our country's most complex, strategic, and consequential relationships. We work closely with the Mexican government to implement the administration's agenda. As you've said, Chairwoman, we cannot move, and neither can they. President Trump has a productive relationship with Mexican President Sheinbaum that has helped to advance U.S. goals. As partners, we can accomplish more together. This administration is working with Mexican authorities to take swift and decisive action against transnational criminal organizations, including the 6 Mexican cartels the State Department designated as foreign terrorist organizations in February. Mexico has increased cooperation with the United States to intensify efforts as sovereign partners to dismantle transnational drugs and arms trafficking and take concrete steps to secure the border. This includes deploying 10,000 National Guard personnel, increasing their security forces' operational tempo to arrest cartel leaders and achieve major fentanyl and precursor seizures, and transferring 55 high-value targets to U.S. custody to face justice. Concurrently, the administration is working with Mexico to disrupt criminal organizations' illicit financing activity. In June, in cooperation with Mexico, the Treasury Department, under the Fentanyl Sanctions Act and Fend Off Fentanyl Act, targeted 3 Mexican financial institutions connected to illicit opioid trafficking. In November, Treasury sanctioned 27 individuals and entities in Mexico's gambling sector. Mexico took complementary enforcement actions. To ensure we're delivering results, the United States and Mexico established a high-level security implementation group to coordinate concrete actions to dismantle the narco-terrorist groups, end the fentanyl crisis, combat illicit finance, prevent fuel theft, increase investigations and prosecutions, halt the flow of drugs and illicit firearms, and strengthen border security. Securing our border and eliminating illegal immigration remains a top priority. Encounters at our southwest border are at a historic low, down almost 90% since the start of the Trump administration. Mexico has increased border enforcement and accepts more third country nationals deported from the United States than any other country. We continue to press Mexico to do more to reduce this flow of illegal immigration among its own citizens. Mexico is also our largest trading partner, and our economic supply chains are more intertwined than ever. In November, Mexico overtook Canada as the United States' largest export market. Last year, our trilateral trade hit a record $840 billion and is moving toward the $1 trillion mark this year. Mexico is the second largest buyer of U.S. critical minerals and the #1 destination for U.S. exports of refined petroleum, natural gas, and many other products. Moving forward, the administration will safeguard U.S. economic security, including encouraging Mexico in its efforts to stop predatory Chinese trade practices. We also need to stop the importation of fentanyl precursors from Chinese producers, which supply foreign terrorist organizations and poison our population. As we look to the joint USMCA review next year, the administration will ensure the agreement is effective in strengthening regional supply chains, preventing free riding from third countries, and above all, that it remains in the interest of U.S. citizens. Another issue of primary importance for the administration, directly affecting U.S. citizens, is transboundary water management, ensuring Mexico delivers water for South Texas border communities, and resolving the problem of transboundary pollution affecting Southern California are key priorities, and we have seen improved cooperation over the past year and achieved major results on both fronts in just the past week. President Sheinbaum has been responsive on issues critical to U.S. interest. Unfortunately, in adhering to its constitutionally prescribed non-interventionist foreign policy, the current administration has frequently acted counter to what we believe to be our shared values and to U.S. objectives. We continue to urge Mexico to reconsider these positions. We are at a pivotal moment in our bilateral relationship with President Trump, and President Sheinbaum agreed to cooperate. There is still much work to do, but working with this committee, we can secure U.S. interest, advance U.S. goals with Mexico and throughout the region in ways that deliver for the American people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Dueholm. And now I recognize Mr. Landberg for an opening statement. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Chairwoman Salazar, Ranking Member Castro, Representative Titus, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss how the State Department's Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, known as INL, is advancing President Trump's mission in Mexico to secure our homeland from deadly drugs and dismantle the foreign terrorist organizations trafficking them. Threats from the southwest border expand across our nation. The new national security strategy focuses on reestablishing full control of our border and protecting our nation from illegal immigration, narco-terrorism, and drugs, in line with executive orders on securing our borders and protecting the American people against invasion. INL works with all U.S. agencies comprising the Homeland Security Task Force established to combat transnational criminal organizations and smuggling networks. Under President Trump's leadership, reasserting American sovereignty and defending our people is our top priority. We have secured our borders and continue to prevent fentanyl and other drugs, which killed nearly 80,000 Americans in 2024, from entering our homeland. During Secretary Rubio's September trip to Mexico, he highlighted that security cooperation had reached a historic level and launched the Security Implementation Group. And PDAS, Dueholm, and I just returned from our latest Security Implementation Group meeting in Mexico last week, where we worked to build on security successes so far. The results of the President's leadership speak for themselves. Mexico has extradited, as PDAS Dueholm said, extradited or transferred 133 major cartel figures to the United States this year to stand trial for their crimes. This includes Rafael Caro Quintero, who tortured and murdered DEA agent Kiki Camarena in 1985. The Trump administration is holding these criminals to account and seeking justice for the American people. INL delivers targeted training, equipment, and technical expertise to enable Mexican security forces to work with HSTF, this is the Homeland Security Task Force, law enforcement agencies to stop crime before it hurts Americans. INL's approach delivers three critical outcomes: First, degrading and dismantling cartels to eliminate the threat to the homeland. Second, stopping fentanyl and other drugs to prevent American overdose deaths. And third, securing the border to stop the flow of illicit goods and illegal aliens. INL-trained anti-money laundering units are identifying illicit financial networks and seizing cartel assets. Our vetted units of highly selected and trained Mexican officials work with HSTF law enforcement agencies. These include the FBI, DEA, ATF, ICE, HSI, and others, and they are producing major wins. This year, INL-supported vetted units dismantled 29 synthetic drug-producing clandestine labs. In September, an INL-supported HSI unit, as part of Operation Hydra, diverted and seized over 316,000 kilograms of methamphetamine precursors, which was enough to produce 190,000 kilograms of meth valued at $569 million. That operation prevented the Sinaloa cartel from flooding U.S. communities with deadly drugs and dealt them a significant financial blow. In October, an INL-supported FBI unit conducted undercover fentanyl purchases in Mexico that led to the U.S. indictment of a Jalisco New Generation cartel-affiliated trafficker with 150,000 fentanyl pills seized. In November, an INL-supported HSI-vetted unit seized assets from Ivan Archivaldo Guzman Salazar, a leader of Los Chapitos and son of El Chapo. In Sonora, INL, which is over on the West Coast, INL and DHS helped launch Mexico's first dedicated state-level border patrol unit, which is already disrupting cartel lookout sites and trafficking routes along the Arizona border. We're also training Mexican forces to counter the threat of weaponized drones, which I'd be happy to talk about more. INL coordinates with these Homeland Security Task Force agencies to ensure a unified approach that maximizes results and avoids duplication. For example, INL, the Department of War, and U.S. law enforcement work together to build Mexican security force interoperability, operational proficiency, and lethality. We're also insisting on greater burden sharing. Mexico must invest more in its own security infrastructure and sustain these capabilities on its own. Our assistance is catalytic, not perpetual. It is also imperative for Mexico to root out corruption within its institutions and bring the full force of its justice system upon the criminals who have brought death and destruction to our hemisphere. The cartels remain a powerful and lethal force in Mexico, and fentanyl and other synthetic drugs still take far too many American lives. Under President Trump's leadership, we are working with Mexican partners to address this threat with unprecedented results. This is what America First security cooperation looks like: swift action, measurable outcomes, and a commitment to protect American lives. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions and to working with this committee.
Thank you, Mr. Landberg, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. We know that Mexico is the big launching pad of drugs to the United States, and those drugs come from either Honduras or Venezuela or Colombia or Mexico itself. So tell me, what else can Mexicans do at this hour? As I said during my opening statements, we understand them, we recognize publicly that they are helping us more than ever, and that President Sheinbaum is having a closer relationship with the State Department and with the law enforcement agencies in the United States to stop that flow from Mexico. What else could they do that they're not doing? I understand about the non-intervention. I understand that it's very difficult for Mexicans to allow the Americans to step on their soil. But what else is this hour that is so crucial in this this war that we have with the drug cartels? What else can they do specifically?
There are a number of things, and I do want to reiterate that the cooperation is at a level that we have not seen. And we have had success on a level that we have not seen in a long time with Mexico. There are a number of things to close the border to these organizations that are pushing drugs up in the United States. They have put National Guard up against the borders, but increasing the number of forces on the borders, expanding the use of non-intrusive inspection equipment along the entire border, increasing the cooperation between the border forces, CBP on the United States side and the Mexican side, so that we're sharing information better, so that we have better control of what's going across the border, going north with drugs and illegal immigrants, but going south with trafficking of arms, for example, which are then feeding the violent criminal organizations. Working with the Central Americans, specifically Guatemala and Belize, to close those borders. There was a meeting of the three presidents. They are making advancements, but that's an area where that's an uncontrolled area. That's an area where there is possible U.S. support and where it could be a choke point for the entire northern continent. I think further expanding on the trusted units.
Why do you think that President Sheinbaum is not giving the green light for us to be able to help her in those areas that you just mentioned?
Well, I do think I do think President Sheinbaum is moving in all of these areas. I think we'd like to see more. We'd like to see more resources dedicated to security. They are increasing the amount of resources in their 2026 budget, but we need to see more resources in security. This is a shared problem. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have died over the last 10 years from fentanyl and other drugs, but many, many Mexicans have died from the violence of these criminal groups. We need to see more across the board. We've been explicit with them. Another aspect we'd like to see is President Trump reached an agreement with President Xi Jinping on controlling precursor chemicals exports to basically the three North American countries. We would like to see the Mexican government talk to China on a regular basis and press them on the precursors, because almost all the precursors are coming from China to Mexico to make the fentanyl.
And why do you think that has not happened?
Well, I think to some extent they have. I do not think it has been to this point as forceful as we have been on the precursor issue. I mean, it was a huge success achieved by the president to control these 13 precursors. And the Chinese government also issued an advisory about controlling the trade, similar to how they've issued advisories related to methamphetamine precursors. So the Chinese are working on this. We need to see other countries. This is the same message that we've given the European countries as well. We need to see a unified approach with China and other possible sources of precursors. We'd like to see the Mexicans step up their game in that way.
Now, let me just change course. I just mentioned about the Mexican doctors. Mexican doctors is something that is worldwide known. It's not only Mexico, but it happens in Africa, it happens in Jamaica, it happens everywhere, where the Cuban government sends them as slaves. And as I said, they never acquire, they can never earn what their salary says. We know that. It's something that is widely known. That violates the USMCA provisions of human trafficking or slavery or forced labor, whatever provision you want to call it. So what are we planning to do next year when we're reviewing the USMCA with Mexico to send a very strong message that we are not going to allow for that to continue happening with one of our partners? What is your response to that?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to start, if I may, by acknowledging your tireless advocacy for people throughout the hemisphere living in oppressed situations and leading against authoritarian and dictatorial regimes, not just in Cuba, but Nicaragua and Venezuela as well. It's very useful as we seek to try to restore rights to people who've been deprived of them. Agreed, and thank you. With respect to the Cuban Doctors Program, we agree with you entirely. It's very cynical how the Cuban government has been able to dress up a trafficking in persons program as a noble gesture for a fee to governments for medical services. So we are taking a global push to encourage countries around the world, urge them to step out of this program to either
But in this case, we have a free trade agreement with Mexico that specifically says that you cannot do that. That's not a behavior that's acceptable if you are going to be trading with the United States. It's our duty right now that treaty is going to be reviewed to look into that. So what's your plan for next year?
Yeah, so Madam Chair, they do have the second largest medical missions program in the world with 3,650 medical workers. With respect to USMCA, I would have to defer to USTR, the U.S. Trade Representative's Office on that, but I will say that we continue to raise this issue at all levels of the Mexican government. The Secretary has raised it. I was in Mexico last week and spoke to the Acting Foreign Secretary about it myself, and we will continue to push them on it.
Thank you very much. I don't want to abuse my time. I want to give the opportunity to Ranking Member Castro for the next 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you all for your testimony today. And I wanted to follow up with you, Mr. Landberg, on your testimony. I know you spoke a lot about the dangers of drugs and fentanyl and what Mexico is doing. and what the United States, the pressure that we've put on Mexico to treat it more seriously. There is, of course, a supply side that we need to control, and thank you for your work on that. There's also the demand side. And have you been part of any conversations or policy work to try to curb the demand side in the United States?
So thank you for your question, sir. We do work closely with ONDCP and HHS.
Can you give the acronym because?
Sorry. ONDCP is the National Drug Control Strategy Organization, part of the White House. And then HHS is House and Human Services. My apologies. So we work with them. Both of those agencies have the lead on countering demand, prevention, treatment, education within the United States. We work very closely with them on these subjects, but our authorities are from the water's edge out, and so we would be more focused on those kind of issues related to our work in other countries.
Sure. No, and I understand y'all are the State Department, but I ask the question because my fear is that all of our work on the supply side is made tougher by the fact that, for example, you have healthcare subsidies that are about to expire here in a matter of days, and there are many folks who are addicted to drugs like fentanyl right now, or cocaine or other drugs, who will lose the ability to be seen by a doctor or get treatment for addictions. There has also been less resources committed to addiction recovery and treatment. And so, you know, we're pushing in one direction, I think, on a positive side and working with Mexico to combat all these things. And then in the United States, making it tougher, making people more vulnerable by what we're taking away from Americans. But I want to ask you a question about arms trafficking, and I think you spoke to it a bit. I just recently refiled the Armas Act, which is meant to combat arms trafficking to Mexico. Something like between 80 and 90% of the guns that are used by these cartels to rain violence across Mexico come from the United States, including many from my home state of Texas. And one of the outcomes of the inaugural U.S.-Mexico Security Implementation Group was a commitment to expand the use of the United States Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms e-trace system to all 32 Mexican states. And this would allow us to track where weapons came from and prosecute the criminals who buy them from U.S. gun stores and sell them to cartels. So I wanted to ask you, when do you expect all 32 Mexican states and law enforcement entities will be able to use the e-trace platform? And is INL providing funding to help Mexican states accomplish this goal?
Thank you for that question. The answer is yes. INL has been working with all 32 states. So far, we have expanded e-trace to 25 of the 32 states. We continue to talk to the other 7. I can't give you a timeline and when.
What's the holdup generally, or do you have an understanding?
I think this is just a matter of like rolling it out and having discussions with the different states, but I don't know the specifics. I don't know if you do. I will say that this has been a priority for all of us. We see this as a direct U.S. national security issue. These guns are going right to the cartels and increasing their lethality and threatening not just Mexican security forces, but U.S. citizens in Mexico. CBP has been stepping up its efforts to try to control the flow of the guns going south. Sure. We are working with ATF to set up a specialized unit that would then focus on the issue of the illegal guns.
Let me just jump to one more subject because my
sure.
time is running down, but I appreciate it. I understand that this hearing is on Mexico, of course, and it's an important issue that needs to be discussed, but given the urgency and weight of what's going on right now in Venezuela, I have to raise that issue as y'all oversee Western Hemisphere affairs. Last night, the president announced a blockade of Venezuela and demanded a return of, quote, oil, land, and other assets from Venezuela. The president has said that land strikes will be imminent. Ms. Dueholm, you are the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for the Western Hemisphere, and you're here speaking for the administration. Can you explain to this Congress in clear terms why we would want to send service members to war in Venezuela for oil and land, as the president has said?
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Castro. I would First of all, the president's tweet, I think, was very clear on his intentions. I can say that the administration has been very focused on ensuring that narco traffickers are not able to threaten Americans, the many hundreds of thousands of Americans who have died as a result of the drugs that they import to the U.S. are clearly a top priority to the president, and we will continue to be focused on that. We do have other concerns with Nicolas Maduro as well. In addition to the fact that he is the head of an international cartel, drug trafficking, the Cartel de los Soles. He's also an illegitimate leader. He also is suppressing his people, and we have a number of concerns with him, but certainly narco
But
trafficking is the
Juan
president's
Orlando Hernandez was one of the largest drug traffickers the United States has ever known, and he was pardoned by the president. Can you explain how those two things are squared?
Thank you, Representative Castro. My understanding is the president reviewed the charges against Juan Orlando Hernandez and reached the conclusion that they were not appropriate charges and took the decision to pardon him.
Thank you. I yield back.
I thank both witnesses. I need to excuse myself since I have to go to the Financial Services Committee. There's a market vote, but I'm going to give the gavel to the distinguished Congressman from the state of Florida, Mr. Mills. Thank you. I hope to be back.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for this hearing and for what you've done. I look forward to having you back. At this time, we're going to recognize Representative Shreve for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To our witnesses, we've recognized that most U.S. Foreign assistance to Mexico is administered through states' Bureau of International Narcotics and Labor. The stated goal is to combat transnational criminal organizations and illicit narcotics. But a 2023 GAO report found serious shortcomings under the bicentennial framework. State and INL failed, past tense, to define specific projects, establish measurable benchmarks, and implement monitoring plans. As a result, Congress was asked to fund large assistance packages without metrics, clear metrics for success or accountability for the future. Under the Biden administration, the U.S. provided more than $1 billion, more than $1 billion in assistance to Mexico. During the same period, this country experienced historic border encounters and massive fentanyl flows. By contrast, in the first year of this administration, border encounters dropped to the lowest level ever recorded. For the start of the year, fentanyl seizures are down, and Mexico has stepped up enforcement against organized crime. And it's done so at substantially lower cost. The contrast raises a question for Congress. Was the problem a lack of resources or a lack of accountability and strategy? That's not a question for you two. The question for you two is, if we look at the outcomes over these two periods, what do you believe most explains the differences we're seeing now? A change in our strategy, a change in U.S. strategy, a change in Mexican enforcement procedures, postures, or a stronger accountability for results? I'd welcome a response from either of you.
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I think the answer is really all of the above. Certainly, the president has set a very clear tone about what he expects from this relationship and placed a very high priority on delivering results. President Sheinbaum, at the same time, has demonstrated great will herself to make changes and address what I believe she sees as one of her major issues as Mexicans suffer, as my colleague pointed out earlier. So the political will is at a level that I think we have not seen before, And we are implementing new ways of providing accountability and increasing our mechanism. It's one of the very positive spots, I think, in our current cooperation. The meeting that SBO Landberg and I went to in Mexico City last week was our second security implementation group meeting. By design, this is intended to create much more accountability for all of us. We are meeting on a monthly basis, revisiting every commitment that we have made rather than allowing those to sit into perpetuity, and having very high-level representatives of both governments sit and answer for the commitments that they'd made previously and ensuring that we're delivering results. Another way of ensuring that accountability is we are releasing public statements after each one of these meetings to provide transparency so people can see what we're doing and to hold ourselves accountable from both bureaucracies. So I think the answer is really all of the above. Thank you.
I appreciate that response. And let me pivot to a different question for Mr. Landberg. I referenced that 2023 GAO report was clear about the deficiencies under the bicentennial framework, no defined projects, no measurable benchmarks, no monitoring plans. What specific changes has INL already implemented under this administration or is prepared to implement to correct those failures?
Thank you, sir. First, under the Foreign Assistance Review earlier this year, after President Trump and Secretary Rubio came in, we reviewed every single program we have. We ended programs that we thought were not advancing core U.S. national security interests of keeping Americans or making Americans safer and stronger. We reorganized the INL office. We are now focused on sort of major buckets of counter-narcotics, countering the organization's illicit finance, border security, and much more narrow criminal justice. And then we are working to measure results better, not only within INL, but we're insisting that all the counterparts, U.S. law enforcement they work with, they all work through our system. It's called Dev Results, to basically, have metrics and measure that we're having an impact to keep Americans safe.
I appreciate that. I just want to note that earlier today, my Mexican Cross-Border Accountability Act passed the Senate as part of the NDAA just a few hours ago, and it incorporates the GAO's recommendations and requires fraud risk assessments for these programs. It's the kind of accountability that our taxpayers expect. I appreciate your comments, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you so much. At this time, I'd recognize the gentlelady from Nevada, Representative Titus, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to even ask y'all about how the rest of the region feels about the gratuitous renaming of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. Is anybody using that besides us? I doubt it very seriously. Just another little slap in the face. But I want to talk about the drug issue. I was listening to you, Mr. Landberg. I've tried to jot down some of the things you were saying, bragging about what the INL has done. A lot of that was an accounting of some of the number of pills you've seized and the number of people you've captured. And you said, we want to hold criminals to account to protect the American people. We want to stop crime before it hurts Americans. We want to go after the labs and the kilograms and the undercover operations. All of that is very commendable. But it seems to me that the policy of the president is do as I say, not as I do. I'd like to go back to the ranking member's question about the pardon. We've seen 2 people that just off the top of my head who have been pardoned because they are in the narcotics business. We had the former president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who trafficked more than 400 tons of drugs and even said he wanted to shove the drugs right up the noses, I think it was noses, some body part, of the gringos. He was convicted, you said, with, I think, illegitimate charges. It couldn't be illegitimate charges. It was a jury trial. It wasn't some trumped-up political going after this person. It was a jury trial, so it couldn't have been illegitimate charges. And then you've also seen the president's pardon of Russ Albrecht, who was convicted of selling more than $200 million worth of drugs on the website. He got pardoned. Did he also have so-called illegitimate charges? Now, how can you do your job of improving relations with these countries in Central America and this region with the U.S. when we are pardoning the people who are doing the very things that we are trying to force them to do. Could you just reconcile that for me in a better way than just illegitimate charges? Both of you, either of you?
Thank you very much for the question, Congresswoman. And if I may, just very briefly, you and I met previously when we were lucky enough to host you in Timor-Leste when you came with the House Democracy Partnership, and that visit was so meaningful in that country. And we really appreciated your attention there, and thank you very much for your attention here in the hemisphere.
Well, thank you.
With respect to what we're trying to do, I would say that we are absolutely laser focused on ensuring that the American citizens are protected from the pernicious influence of the cartels. We will continue to find partners that we can work with to attack those cartels and break up their business models, and that remains our focus.
Mr. Landberg?
Thank you for that question. I'll add on to that. Every single country that we're working with, from Mexico, down through South America, they also see this as a threat to them. And so we are seeing unprecedented levels of cooperation across the board with many of these countries, and specifically, as we've said, with Mexico. So we have opportunities, as President Trump has dramatically increased all the activities aimed at dismantling these cartels. We have a level of political will in the region that we have not seen in a long time, and we're taking advantage of that, and we're working to, degrade them, dismantle them, and that will lead to lower drug flows and protecting American citizens. That's the goal of INL. We're doing it across the region, and we continue to do it. And
I appreciate that, but that certainly doesn't answer my question. I don't think you want to answer my question, so you need not thank me for the question. But now you mentioned about HDP. That's something I care a lot about, helping to build up democracies where they are new on the scene or where they're backsliding. And apparently the administration has said American diplomacy should continue to stand up for genuine democracy. How can we stand up for genuine democracy when we have stripped so much of the funding for programs through USAID, where we do go and help to build up democracy? And since you've been experienced with it and you mentioned my work with it, maybe you could address that. Surely you're concerned about that.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. We have redone our assistance platforms to be very strategic in the way that we're using taxpayer dollars and ensuring that they're meeting the administration's direct priorities, to include life-saving assistance, to include addressing security, stopping illegal migration, working to provide some stability in Haiti, and trying to find opportunities to build out on the national security strategies, focus on the Western Hemisphere as diplomatic opportunities present.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I'll yield.
Thank you. At this time, I'll go ahead and recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Dueholm, the Mexican government has extradited a large number of these cartel kingpins to the United States within weeks of President Trump taking office. Before that, under Obrador and even in the early days of Sheinbaum's administration, such action had been resisted. What has changed, and do you think Mexico's true capacity for action is faced only when meaningful economic consequences arise?
Thank you, Congressman. Certainly, we have seen an unprecedented level of extraditions and transfers, and it has been incredibly meaningful for our law enforcement community to really be able to address the cartels and their power. There has been a major difference. There are all kinds of reasons we could attribute that to. Certainly, the president has made clear his determination to see the cartels broken up and to stop threatening Americans, so I'm sure that that is a major motivating factor. I think this administration in Mexico also is taking a very new look at the way that they do things. They've been very creative and willing to be collaborative in ways that we've not seen other governments do so. They see the threat to Mexico, and I think are very eager to also deal with the threat on their side. So it is really a mutual commitment to addressing the cartels and addressing this shared threat.
Thank you so much for that. Sticking with you for a minute and talking about border and migration. Mexican migrant encounters in Chiapas, the southern Mexican state of the border with Guatemala, dropped by 93% in 2025. What specific enforcement mechanisms was making this possible?
Yeah, so at the beginning of this administration, Mexico began focusing on what additional things they could do to help in stopping illegal migration to the U.S. They put in place something called Operativo Frontera Norte, which brought 10,000 National Guard troops to the border. They've been conducting security checks on various pathways and patrolling in 18 border cities. In doing that, they have given us numbers that we can't confirm independently, but they cite 9,851 arrests, 7,322 firearms, 115,000 kilos of drugs seized, of which have been 560 of fentanyl. And so those are the kinds of results we're seeing, and it's in large part due to this commitment from the Mexican government.
And just sticking on that as a follow-up, why do you feel this was not done under the previous administration, the Biden administration?
We had two new administrations that both chose to take a different approach.
Okay, thank you so much. Go into another key issue, and INL's the right place for this, knowing the great destruction that fentanyl, opioids, and others have had in America and families, especially coming from a family where drugs have riddled us with addiction, things like that. My mother and father obviously fought it for almost all their lives. Dad spent almost 30 plus years in prison. Mom spent over 7.5. This has really plagued many Americans, and this, in my opinion, has been one of the greatest issues is what's going on with regards to the drug trafficking. The U.S. border fentanyl seizures has declined by 53% in the first half of 2025. What explains this drop in fentanyl seizures?
Well, one of the explanations, sir, and thank you for that question, is that under the Sheinbaum administration, seizures within Mexico have increased. Also, disruption of the supply chain, disruption of the cartel activities, especially a focus on like the plaza bosses near the border, that has all helped to disrupt all the movement of this. I think that is like the main thing. We have seen street prices of fentanyl increase somewhat in the United States, so that seems to indicate also that the level of flows has decreased.
And just kind of sticking on this, I want to touch on something because we know that in the Darien Gap area, you had Chinese who actually were running fentanyl presses to try and go ahead and indirectly have an impact on Americans. Really quickly, the DOJ had announced that Zhidong Zhang, a Chinese money laundering facilitator with ties to the Mexican cartels, was extradited from Mexico to the United States to face narcotics money laundering charges. What is your assessment of China's role in financing and supplying Mexican drug cartel organizations?
Can I ask, sir, are you talking about individual Chinese and private companies, or?
Let's go ahead and go with individual and state. Because we know that the CCP has been highly involved within the Western Hemisphere to expand not only the economic coercion they attempted in Nicaragua as well as for Panama and Honduras, but also for what they've been doing with trying to finance, in many cases, a geopolitical expansion within the region to try and go ahead and force America into a pretty difficult position.
Well, sir, there are absolutely Chinese individuals and companies that have been involved in obviously selling the precursors into the region or diverting it through third countries and then to the region, primarily to Mexico, but we've seen also to Central America. And I think we're also focused very much on what's called the Chinese Money Laundering Organization, which is really more of a network of individuals and companies that are involved in laundering a lot of the proceeds of the cartels. So there definitely is this involvement. I can say in part of the Chinese government, I think the key thing to mention is the November 10 agreement between President Trump and President Xi, where they started to really control the export of these precursors. So that's what we've been demanding from China. They're now complying. We need to see them continue to control those precursors because that is the main source of it for the region. So we'll see how that washes out.
Thank you so much. At this time, I'd like to recognize the gentlelady from California, Representative Jacobs, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Dueholm, would it be accurate to say that the stated goal of the boat strikes in the Caribbean is counter narcotics and, as you just said, to break up the business models of the cartels?
That has been my understanding of the president's statements.
Okay, so if the goal is counter narcotics, can you help me understand why the department actually canceled counter narcotics programs that were actually reducing drug trafficking in the region? For example, a program that was operating along the transit route for Colombia's narco traffickers that helped people build a cacao business to serve as a legal alternative to the business of coca, the plant used to make cocaine. USAID's closure has led to the cancellation of many of these programs, and the president's FY26 budget request asked for a 90% cut to counter-narcotics programs. So can you explain to the committee why the department has slashed the very programs that would help stem drug trafficking when that is the president's apparent goal?
Thank you very much for the question, Congresswoman. It is absolutely a top goal of this administration to counter cartels and to stop narcotics flowing into the U.S. We have taken a very full and thorough review of all of U.S. foreign assistance to try to determine those which best meet the strategic needs of the U.S. government, and those are the ones that are being carried forward in a more targeted fashion.
So are you saying that the counter-narcotics program that have empirical evidence to show that they were effective actually were not in the interest of the United States?
I'm saying that after a thorough review of all of the programs that were currently being operated, the administration elected not to go forward with a certain number of those.
Mr. Landberg, sounds like she's impugning the work that your bureau does. I think the INL programs in counter-narcotics have been incredibly effective and successful.
Well, thank you, Representative. You were also mentioning USAID programs, which is different. We in INL did not have many alternative development programs ongoing in Colombia or elsewhere. But we have taken a full review of all our programs, and we have refocused our global efforts on the key projects that are going to keep Americans safe and make sure they're stronger and more prosperous. I mean, it's about U.S. national security. We understand that there are many threats in all of the countries where we work. They have a number of priorities. We are prioritizing the use of our resources on what is like really advancing U.S. national security.
Sure,
And that
I understand.
has been countering cartels and drugs and...
I would argue that providing alternatives to farmers so that the cartels don't have a source of product is one of the most important things we are doing. And so I guess that leads me to ask, like, if the strikes are really for counter-narcotics purposes, why are we doing the very things that we know are proven to support counter-narcotics? And I have to ask, is any part of the strategy, any objective or goal in any part of the strategy about destabilizing the Maduro regime in any way?
Congresswoman, I would refer to the president's remarks. Those were the most authoritative comments on our position in Venezuela.
Okay, so I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the Vanity Fair article that came out yesterday, in which White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles said he, Trump, wants to keep on blowing boats up until Maduro cries uncle, and people way smarter than me on that say that he will.
Without objection.
Thank you. So could you, what I'm hearing is that you're unwilling to actually say what the objective is. Is it counter-narcotics, in which case what we're doing is counterproductive? Or is it to destabilize the Maduro regime, in which case the American people deserve transparency on why U.S. taxpayer funds and weapons are being used to commit extrajudicial killings in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Venezuela is very much clearly a source of narcotics, very much a concern for us on that front, which is a top priority for this administration. Nicolas Maduro is the head of the Cartel de los Soles, and so is very much a concern on that front. We have additional concerns with President Maduro, but we will continue to focus on ensuring that he doesn't threaten Americans.
Okay, excellent. My last question, Mr. Landberg, is for you. You've probably seen CNN reporting that the United Kingdom, our single closest intelligence partner, has suspended intelligence sharing because of their concerns about what's happening in the Caribbean operations. What would happen if Colombia followed the lead of the Brits and suspended their intelligence sharing to avoid legal liability for the strikes, when we know that the majority of actionable intelligence on drug movements in the region actually come from Colombia?
Well, we don't have any indication that that's going to happen. Obviously that information is important. It's not the only source of information in the region that we get.
And do you have any contingency planning for when that happens?
I'm not aware that that's going to happen. We are still working very closely with Colombian security forces I think we have other sources of information in the region, and a lot of it is overlapping. So, but again, we have been working with Colombian security forces for decades. The partnerships continue. Even though we declared them demonstrably failing in the majors list report, there was a waiver. We're allowed to keep working with them. They have very close relationships with U.S. law enforcement. The information is flowing. I think that's what we expect is going to continue happening.
Okay.
Thank you so much. At this time, we'll recognize the gentlelady from South Carolina, Representative Biggs, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. So in my district, there's a huge billboard, and I ride by and I look at these array of pictures of beautiful young men and women who have fallen to fentanyl poisoning. So this is an important hearing, and I appreciate your input today. So my question is, and I'll leave it open to either of you or both of you, Chinese chemical suppliers and intermediaries continue to be linked to precursor chemicals used by Mexican cartels to produce fentanyl and other synthetic drugs. So what evidence do U.S. agencies have regarding the current role of China-based actors in supplying or financing Mexico's fentanyl production, and how effective has Mexico been in disrupting those networks?
Yes, we believe, and there's a lot of evidence, that the majority of the precursor chemicals that are used to make or cook fentanyl in Mexico come from China. There is a diversion of illicit flows of precursors, but a lot of it is actually through illicit means. We have been pressuring the Chinese government and working with them very closely. There was this landmark agreement in November between the two presidents, President Trump and President Xi Jinping, to increase controls on these precursor flows. We're monitoring that very closely because that is what is feeding the fentanyl production. We know that that the cartels are looking at other options. They are looking at developing new recipes. They're pivoting. They also are able to, these are organizations that are revenue focused, so they're neutral in terms of what drugs they are trafficking. So it's an area that we're working closely with all our partners on, and I think it's going to come clear in coming months what this new decision with China is going to mean.
So to clarify, do you feel like we're making progress in this area?
I do. Well, first of all, in Mexico, we're seeing an unprecedented level of coordination across the board. We've seen an increase in investigations and arrests, in extraditions. So we are seeing dramatically increased efforts to degrade and dismantle the cartels and to block the flow of drugs. And then on the other side, we've seen increased work with China to control the flow of precursors. So we are making progress. I think it will still be, over the next months, it will become clear how effective the Chinese controls are on these precursors and whether these cartels have been able to maybe find alternative sources.
Great, thank you. Do you have anything to add to that? So my second question is, how has U.S. and Mexico cooperation evolved to address the nexus between Chinese-linked precursor chemical supply chains, money laundering networks, and Mexican drug trafficking organizations? And where do gaps in the Mexican regulatory or enforcement capacity remain?
So I think one of the things that we've been very clear that we want to see more investigations, arrests, indictments, prosecutions, and putting people in jail and extradition. So I think in the criminal justice area, there's a lot of work that Mexico could do. INL does have narrowly focused criminal justice programs to work with prosecutors and potentially even judges that are focused on dismantling the cartels through prosecutions. I think that is an area, that is a gap. But as our ambassador in Mexico has said, we need to do more of that. We need to do it faster. And one of the sort of the 4 pillars of the INL program in Mexico is to focus on that, criminal justice side of undermining these organizations.
Great, thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. At this time, we'll recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Congressman Stanton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and to the witnesses who are here today. This hearing is about our relationship with Mexico, but I'll start with China, because China is America's #1 economic competitor on the global stage. And make no mistake, they have their eye on the Western Hemisphere. They're heavily invested in Latin American countries, trying to curry favor. And the CCP has created choke points in supply chain, choke points they've shown they're willing to exploit, like restricting critical minerals essential to manufacture semiconductors. Mexico, meanwhile, is a critical ally in the ability of the United States to stand up to China. They're the United States' top trading partner, not just for food and commercial goods, but for important manufacturing items like high-tech power and data cables necessary for AI infrastructure. They're interested in building out a North American semiconductor ecosystem, and they're perfectly situated for nearshoring, so that if it doesn't make sense to move particular supply chains directly into the United States, those jobs can exist in a nearby allied country. In short, a strong U.S.-Mexico relationship is critical to winning the economic competition with China. So you'd think that the Trump administration would be working hand in hand with our geographic next-door neighbor to bring the manufacturing and industries that support it to North America. Instead, they're hammering Mexico with 25% tariffs. They're throwing doubt into the future of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, the core of our partnership. They're sticking a fork in the eye of our friends. How can our allies count on this administration to be a reliable partner? So let's start with USMCA. This incredibly successful trade deal negotiated in Trump's first term with bipartisan support is up for review next year. If we want a predictable, secure supply chains that diversify away from China, we have to get this review right. Business leaders in my home state of Arizona that I've spoken to want a trilateral agreement that ends tariffs on USMCA-compliant goods, develops secure supply chains to break China dominance of the critical minerals and active pharmaceutical ingredients, and deters transshipment when bad actors try to misrepresent a good's true country of origin. Ms. Dueholm, briefly, how can State Department work with USTR and Mexico to stop transshipments from China?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. USTR has assured us that actually a big part of the focus of moving forward with a USMCA review in the coming year will be to get at exactly the issues you just raised, to help ensure reliable supply chains and to help keep out third country actors who seek to exploit those. So that is very much a focus of what I understand USTR intends to approach through the USMCA review. We are currently working with Mexico to also try to stem the ability of China and other malignant actors seeking to use Mexico as a transshipment point. Mexico just put in place Plan Mexico this year and just recently passed tariffs of up to 15% on non-FTA products from non-FTA countries, which would include China.
Thanks so much.
That's a very important part. The other part is we're working with Mexico to put in place an investment screening mechanism to help ensure that China and other countries do not get into their critical infrastructure.
Thank you so much. I have worked on building a stronger U.S.-Mexico relationship for 25 years as mayor of Phoenix and now in Congress. I know how important they are, but I also know that as we need to be a better partner with Mexico, Mexico needs to be a better partner with the United States. Business leaders have raised concern about Mexico's judicial reforms, as I have numerous times in this very committee. Those reforms enacted last year lower the eligibility criteria for all judges in the country and require them to be popularly elected to their positions, including the Supreme Court of Mexico. Some of those judges manage complex litigation, including trade disputes. My primary concern, and that of American business community, is that these reforms leave the Mexican judiciary vulnerable to transnational crime organizations or even foreign governments like the PRC. I sent a letter to the Department of State earlier today asking State to raise our deep concerns about Mexico's constitutional reforms as you engage in with your counterparts, particularly in USMCA negotiations. Then there are a matter of the U.S. strikes in the Western Hemisphere, illegal strikes that can't help but color our conversations about the hemisphere. What happens in Venezuela today could happen in Mexico next. Indeed, the president has threatened as recently as last week that we would consider open to action, military action against Mexico. The Mexican government has more work to do to crack down on cartels and narco traffickers, and we should be demanding more accountability. At the same time, it is imperative that we prioritize investing in the U.S.-Mexico security partnership. If the president is serious about stopping narco trafficking, he would not be cutting the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement by 90%, including funds for U.S.-Mexico counter-narcotics. If the president is serious about stopping narco trafficking, he would end the military buildup in the Caribbean and put resources towards fortifying legal ports of entry where more than 80% of the drugs that enter this country are trafficked through. I won't have time to ask my questions because of the time, but I will submit them for the record, and I will yield back. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. At this time, we'll recognize the gentleman from Florida, Congressman Fine, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate us having this hearing on this really important issue. If you think about problems that enter the United States, there's really only 5 ways for them to get in, right? They come from Canada, they could come from the Pacific or the Atlantic, they come from the air, or they could come from Mexico. And so without one of those 5 methods, you know, we're an island on our own. And I think that we've seen a substantial number of issues in this country, particularly illegal immigration and drugs coming in from Mexico. And it is a problem that we have to deal with because they're also an important neighbor and friend. And so we've got to come up with a way to make this relationship work. But I think what is affecting this even more is the impact of insidious actors who may be affecting Mexico, and that is China, a country that I believe sees itself at war with the United States, trying to push us out as the dominant superpower in the world. And we can see what has happened in Mexico to make that happen. You know, there's no reason, you look at all the people that are dying from fentanyl in the United States, and the source of that's generally from China. If you're in the drug dealing business, not that I ever have been, but I would presume killing your customers is not a winning strategy, because they can't give you any more money if you kill them. So why do we have this insidious problem with drugs that kill people? Well, because the purpose of getting it is not to make money, is actually to kill Americans. So I've got some questions. I'm going to start with you, Ms. Dueholm. We've seen how Chinese organized crime has infiltrated Mexico and Latin America broadly in recent years. How have you seen Chinese influence in the drug trade from Mexico increase, and how has that influenced how Mexico conducts its foreign affairs with the United States?
I appreciate the question, Congressman. I believe that President Sheinbaum also recognizes the potential influence of China in Mexico and has sought to stem that in a number of ways. She's done that through trying to control the trade coming in from China, which is certainly a key part of keeping out precursor chemicals. They're collaborating with us, having just recently concluded a memorandum of understanding to share information on air cargo, which will be helpful in being able to track shipments coming in and what is in those. So we definitely see the real risk there, the potential impact of China, but I believe we're both committed to working together to ensure that it doesn't harm our respective countries.
Well, I appreciate that. So to just kind of give an example of this, and I'm interested in your perspective on it. So just this October, a couple months ago, Mexico extradited Zidong Zhang to the United States. As I know, I'm certain you know, he was designated by the DOJ as one of the world's top drug traffickers. He was accused of smuggling tons of chemical precursors. I don't know why we don't just call it fentanyl. It makes it just sound less bad. They're precursors. Well, you know, if I take all the ingredients for fentanyl, it's fentanyl. But he smuggled tons of the precursors for both the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels. He allegedly brought in Chinese chemists, because I guess they don't have enough, to train the cartel's own lab operators on how to do this. Now, we appreciate that Mexico extradited him to us, but it's of serious concern that he escaped from house arrest in China in July in the first place. Theoretically, if you're in house arrest, somebody ought to be making sure that you are staying at home. How's the department working to ensure high-profile criminals in Mexico aren't able to bribe corrupt officials and evade law enforcement? I'll ask both of you, but I'd like to start with you, ma'am, first.
Thank you. Certainly that was a very difficult incident, and I think an embarrassing one for Mexico. We want to make sure that these high-profile targets are brought to justice, as Mexico really made extraordinary efforts to do this year when they transferred 55 long-awaited high-value targets to us. So I believe they have the intent and the will to transfer to us. I will say that there are challenges throughout the system, and there are weak points wherever you have human beings. So we're working together to help identify how we can strengthen their institutions to ensure that these sorts of incidents don't occur.
Thank you. Mr. Landberg, if you've got any perspective.
Well, I would say that we're working very closely with the Mexican Attorney General's office, and especially we're supporting U.S. law enforcement agencies to work with the AG's office. And I think through that coordination and through specialized units that we support, that's one of the best ways that we can have more control over, like, not only like the detained individuals, but the operations that lead to those detentions and to taking down labs and making seizures. So that is one of the main pillars that INL has been supporting, is increased operations by DEA, FBI, CBP, HSI, and others to be able to have these trusted units that they work with in Mexico, and then increase the level of integrity of the operations and ensure that we avoid situations like what you were talking.
Thank you. I appreciate all of your work, and I think we have a lot more to do. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you so much. For all those who are here, we will be looking at a potential second round of questioning. I know all too well that in 5 minutes' time, sometimes you're compressing a lot of questions, and there's a lot that's still left to discuss. So if you are wanting to stay for a second round, please know that's available to you. At this time, we will recognize the gentlelady from California, Congresswoman Kamala Dove, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. So since the premise of the boat strikes that we've seen are about drugs, I want to discuss them, the most recent one of which took place on Monday night. So Mr. Landberg, combating the trafficking of drugs like fentanyl is one of the administration's top priorities in the Western Hemisphere. Is that correct? Yes. And that's the rationale for the strikes on the boats in the Caribbean. So, Mr. Landberg, is fentanyl mainly transported to the United States through maritime sea routes?
These organizations that you're talking about, Representative, and thank you for the question, are trafficking all kinds of poisonous drugs that are part of an integrated chain from Mexican cartels down to South America.
Yes.
Fentanyl primarily comes from Mexico.
Yes, yes. So they're not primarily transported through maritime routes. As you said, Call, they go through all kinds of routes. And according to the DEA and what you just shared, the vast majority of fentanyl entering the United States is transported from Mexico, but also over land. So, Mr. Landberg, are fentanyl precursors mainly shipped through the Caribbean Sea?
I think fentanyl precursors, first of all, fentanyl is such small quantities that the precursors are not significantly small quantities, so they can be shipped through sea or they can be shipped through air.
Yes, exactly. They can come, most from what I've read, once again, according to the DEA, that the precursors generally are shipped via mail. And if they're not, if they do come through sea, they're not on small boats, they're on massive Chinese tankers. So, Mr. Landberg, are the boats in the Caribbean that are transporting drugs, are they typically destined for the United States?
So I think, first of all, I do want to clarify that the boats that are coming from the Caribbean are delivering drugs that are killing Americans, all of them, right? I mean, over 20,000 Americans died last year from cocaine overdose. And the drugs that are coming through the Caribbean, a lot of the cocaine that goes through the Caribbean goes through Dominican Republic or Dominican Republic waters, and there is quite a bit of that goes up north to the United States or through Puerto Rico. It also goes to European markets.
I'm going to reclaim my time because I don't have that much of it. But the answer is, in fact, no. Most of those drugs that are being transported are not going to the United States. They're destined to Europe because we're getting our drugs from China and from Mexico. So, Mr. Landberg, if the United States has real-time intelligence about a maritime drug smuggling operation, do we have the ability to share that information with partner countries to interdict the smugglers when they land?
We coordinate with all the countries in the region, with European partners that have territories in the Caribbean. There is significant information and intelligence sharing among all those countries. We have a number of entities that we've developed in Central America in particular where we coordinate. I refer you to the Department of War to talk about the coordination, the multinational coordination that they conduct through Southcom and JIAD of South. So I think there is a lot of information sharing among all these countries.
I would agree with you. I also agree that the answer is yes. And the reason why I asked that question is because, especially based on the work that you do, and I think you would also argue that you've been successful, that you're in a productive department, that it makes more sense, instead of blowing up a boat, to try to do exactly what you said you want to do more of. You said you want to see more of arrests and prosecutions. And so our counter narcotic capabilities are stronger, in fact, when we are waiting to bust folks. That way you can have these big, press conferences with all the drugs and all the, bandaged up drugs on display, and you can say that the counter narcotics program that you're running in partnership with these other countries netted all of these gains. We have busted up cartels. That's what people want to see, not necessarily boats, being shot up in the air without real evidence to back up what's happening. And I believe that the administration is implying that these strikes are justified because traffickers are breaking the law and indirectly killing people. But the irony is that through these strikes, the administration is breaking the law and killing people. And I just want to close, Mr. Chair, by saying I'm from California. So for me, this is a very real issue. And I've talked to DAs. I've talked to DAs and AUSAs who are saying that they're seeing resources redirected from their departments to ICE. And these are AUSAs and DAs who are monitoring and getting ready to arrest and prosecute MS-13 cartel bosses and leaders, and they are seeing their resources moving away from them, moving away from your work to ICE and ICE raids. So I want to share that, and also for the record, Mr. Chair, I'd like to enter into the record the DEA 2020 report. It's unclassified. Fentanyl flow into the United States. I ask unanimous consent.
Without objection.
And second, I would like to enter into the record, asking unanimous consent, the Council on Foreign Relations dated 2025. How does fentanyl reach the United States? The emphasis is on fentanyl deaths declined under Biden.
Without objection.
Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Thank you. And at this time, we'll recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Congressman Jackson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Let the record reflect that the Trump administration claiming the Western Hemisphere is now a priority. It is inconceivable that today, nearly a year into the Trump administration, this subcommittee is holding its first hearing of the United States Congress with administration officials. Of course, I've long championed attention to the Western Hemisphere, but the way that this administration is approaching the Western Hemisphere, I would say, is dead wrong. The president has spoken about bringing back the Monroe Doctrine, but I'm not sure what he means. Does the president want to bring us back to the time when our policy was to protect the hemispheric economy that was based on slave trade from European powers? I don't know. Or is he pushing a return to a failed Cold War era of U.S. intervention that supported military dictatorships in Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Chile, Guatemala, Haiti, and El Salvador? It's not clear on what he means by returning to the Monroe Doctrine. A reputation we are still trying to repair to this very day. What is clear is that the Trump administration is unleashing chaos and calamity across the region. For a few examples, I'd like to be specific in Colombia. Even though Colombia is our top counter-narcotics partner in the region, President Trump has threatened the president of Colombia and driven a wedge in our relationship. As regards to Mexico, has threatened military strikes on Mexico's sovereign territory. With Panama, he's threatened to take the Panama Canal by force. He has disappeared soccer coaches and hairdressers from the United States to Salvadorian gulags with no due process. For the temporary protective status, he's rounding up thousands of Venezuelans, Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans that are legally in the United States, many of which live in my district and the chairwoman's district, and sending them back to economic hardship, political reprisal, and repression. In Honduras, by releasing the then president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, a known and convicted drug trafficker from United States jails who went through United States courts, who was found guilty of having transported 400 tons of cocaine is just embarrassing and contradictory. Now he wants to have a war with Venezuela, all while bringing back the Iraq War playbook, sending the U.S. to a brink of war with Venezuela, falsely claiming that the military buildup in the Caribbean is to fight drugs while letting out the nation's and our hemisphere's biggest known drug dealer. He's made it clear this is all about oil. I tell you, this erodes our credibility, our standing amongst other nations. With tariffs, he's raised prices on American families by levying tariffs on Canada and Mexico, and has imposed a 50% illegal tariff on Brazil. Argentina and the USAID cuts. Same time, we are not able to export to China. He's giving it to a competitor whom we do very little trade with in Argentina by giving them $40 billion while eliminating our soft power of USAID in the region, allowing China and others to malign characters to fill the void. And those are just a few examples. The region is an unmitigated disaster, and we have to say it's because of this administration. Mr. Landberg, I would ask you, can you help us make sense of this administration's counter-narcotics strategy? On January 21st, President Trump pardoned Ross Ulbricht, who ran one of the largest online drug marketplaces in history and was serving a double life sentence. Earlier this month, the president also pardoned the former president of Honduras, whom an American jury convicted of moving more than 400 tons of cocaine in the United States. Yet at the same time, the administration has authorized lethal military strikes against individuals accused of far less offenses. This administration is releasing the bosses, but killing the pawns. After the September 2nd strike, the Department of Defense ordered the killing of 2 survivors clinging to wreckage. After the October 16th strike, 2 survivors were instead repatriated to their home countries without charges or conditions. Can you please tell me how we can reconcile what this administration's goals are?
Thank you, sir. Related to strikes, I would refer you to the Department of War. Related to counter-narcotics strategy and policy, I can tell you what INL's focus is, generally to support what the President Trump's obvious objective is to unleash all tools that he has to counter this poison that has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. What INL is doing is we are working in a moment of unprecedented will in the region to counter the organizations, to stop the drugs, to increase, criminal justice activities, and to, halt illegal immigration, control borders, control ports. That is what INL is working across the whole region to do and to achieve, and that is in support of the president's overall policies to stop the activities of these organizations, to dismantle them, and to stop the drug flow of fentanyl and keep it from killing American citizens.
Well, thank you, Mr. Landberg. In the future, I look forward to talking with you. I'll share with you some questions that I have, and I hope we can at least sync up on identifying correct United States agencies. I think it's quite foolish to say Department of War. Mr. Secretary Pete Hegseth is wrong. He's foolish. That's the purview of the Congress to name departments. It's not his, and it's not his way or no way at all. But I yield back, and I thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. I will just quickly remind, and Congressman Jackson's a great member, he's a friend, but we are also all frustrated in the fact that we haven't had more hearings, but we did for the first time in over 20 years do a full reauthorization of the State Department, which took a tremendous amount of heavy lifting from the staff and from the members. I look forward to more hearings like this to be able to address further issues and also offer a second round of questioning should you have anything that you've not mentioned, or if you could submit it into a written record. It's completely up to you as you'd wish.
Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
At this time, for the second round, I would like to recognize the ranking member from Texas, Congressman Castro.
Thank you, Chairman. On October 29th, the United States conducted a strike on a boat in the Caribbean, and there were 2 survivors that were picked up from the water. According to reports, the Pentagon proposed sending the individuals to CICOT, the notorious prison in El Salvador, and the State Department lawyers apparently objected. Are you aware of this incident?
Yes, Congressman.
And the 2 individuals were returned to Ecuador and Colombia, the countries that they're citizens of, rather than being prosecuted in U.S. courts. When the individuals were returned to these countries, their governments didn't prosecute them. What information did the United States share with Ecuador and Colombia about these individuals? Did you share that information or any evidence you have of crimes that they may have committed? And just to give this some context, the justification for the boat strikes is that we are killing drug dealers. And so if we have, the United States government has determined that they're drug dealers, they should have evidence to provide to these countries that these are in fact drug dealers so that the countries can then go prosecute them. So what information did the State Department provide, or what information do you know of that was provided by any department of the United States government?
Thank you, Congressman. In this instance, it was the Department of War that conducted the strike and recovered the 2 survivors. They effected the return with the assistance of the State Department. We worked with the 2 host governments you referenced to facilitate their return. I'm not privy to whatever information they may have shared with them at that time.
So you all are the State Department, primarily responsible for relations with foreign nations. The United States government has blown up the citizens of Ecuador and Colombia in this case, and you're not aware of what information we provided to these countries about the drug dealers that we supposedly tried to kill, but they survived?
We facilitated their return, but it was conducted by the Department of War, and they provided what information they were able to, and I can't speak to what that may have been.
So you don't know what crimes these people committed or what they did or anything?
I know that they were a subject of a strike that was based on narco trafficking. Beyond that, I have nothing further.
Sure, but I mean, that's circular reasoning, right? Okay. The only thing I have left is my closing statement, unless you've got other questions.
We can go with closing statements. I had just a few questions. If I could put those. So this time I'll go ahead and recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Landberg, the Department of State's Foreign Terrorist Organization designations, the FTO, for 6 Mexican drug cartels took effect on February of 2025. In June of 2025, our Treasury had identified 3 Mexican financial institutions, Ciabanco, Intercam, and Vector, as primary money laundering concerns for opioid trafficking. How has Mexico responded to these FTO designations is my first question. And to follow that is, what steps has the Sheinbaum administration taken to address cartel infiltration in Mexico's financial sector?
Thank you, Representative Mills, for that question. First, I do want to say that in response to the Treasury OFAC decision on the 3 banks, the Mexican banking authorities did close the 3 banks. I think that was in October. So they did take action. I think we should be thinking about illicit finance as one of the areas where our 2 governments can really make a lot of progress. That sent shockwaves through, I think, both the Mexican banking industry, but also internationally. This is the first time, really, that we're going after these organizations. I think the Treasury, in particular, and I refer you to them for specifics, has been accelerating what they're trying to do to make use of the FTO designations, to use material support as like the basis for prosecuting both individuals and organizations, and that's going to give us a lot of tools for taking down some of these organizations that are working with the cartels. I think the Mexican government's approach has been, I mean, obviously they know that we have designated these organizations as terrorist organizations, and they understand what the legal implications of that are. I think they were already under President Sheinbaum accelerating and intensifying their actions against these organizations. They know that we have additional law enforcement and judicial tools against them. So I mean, I think they appreciate that. I think what we want to do now is think about how we integrate the illicit finance capabilities we have under FTO designations, the new fentanyl as a weapon mass destruction, illicit finance capabilities, and all the other tools that we had prior with transnational criminal organization designations to dramatically increase what we're doing in the 2 countries to go after the sources of funding, the backers of these cartels, and the illicit money flows, because I think that's an area where we really see huge opportunities. We've been talking to the Treasury, the State Department's been talking to Treasury, and we've both been talking to the Mexican government last week at the Security Implementation Group. illicit finance was one of the 2 deep dive areas in addition to counter UAS that we talked about, and that's an area where both of our governments are going to be collaborating more.
Thank you so much. And for my final question for you both, I think that it's, in my personal opinion, I'd love your opinion as the experts, I've seen a dramatic increase since the Trump administration has come in, not only going after the illicit trafficking of fentanyl, opioids, designating some of these cartels as terrorist organizations, looking at the illicit money laundering and trade that's gone on, as well as trying to find the analytical links where China and others are playing a factor into what has been pretty devastating on many American lives. Would you concur, and I'll start with you, Mr. Holm, that things have drastically ramped up for the better in going after these types of illicit activities, but also the partnership between Mexico and the U.S.'s relations?
I would absolutely agree with you, Congressman.
And Mr. Landberg?
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. At this time, I'm going to recognize the ranking member for his closing remarks.
Thank you. I meant to give these remarks as an opening, but I was over on the House floor on the Venezuela resolution, and so I'll give them as a closing. The Trump administration's new national security strategy makes it clear that the Western Hemisphere is a priority for this administration, which is why I'm disappointed that it's taken nearly a year for the administration to send a witness to a hearing at this subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere. The national security strategy revives a Monroe Doctrine with a, quote, Trump corollary, envisioning a United States that exerts its will on our so-called sphere of influence. For Donald Trump, this is an opportunity to put his name on yet another thing. But for the people of Latin America, the Monroe Doctrine harkens back to a dark era that we must not repeat. The Monroe Doctrine has been used by the United States for decades to justify extensive U.S. intervention in the affairs of our Latin American neighbors at the expense of their autonomy and sovereignty. For the people of Guatemala and Chile, the Monroe Doctrine represents U.S.-backed coups of their democratically elected governments. For Haitians, Dominicans, and Mexicans, the Monroe Doctrine recalls repeated U.S. military invasions in the name of security. To Panamanians, it is the legacy of decades-long U.S. control of the Panama Canal at the heart of their country. This administration is returning to a way of operating in Latin America that we rightly rejected after years of failure. We're setting ourselves up to alienate the entire Western Hemisphere for a generation, to the detriment of both our interests and those of the hemisphere. Today's hearing rightly focused on Mexico, a country that is our closest trading partner and arguably our most important bilateral relationship in the world. A strong U.S.-Mexico relationship is essential to both our economic prosperity and our national security. The future of our trade agreement, the USMCA, is vital to both countries, especially to my home state of Texas, that does more trade than any state in the nation. We depend on this trading relationship, and I'm closely tracking the review process. Under President Claudia Sheinbaum, we've seen clear signals of cooperation. Her government has stepped up in meaningful ways, extraditing high-profile fugitives, launching a new federal security strategy, and coordinating more deeply with U.S. agencies than at any time in recent memory. And the United States, to our credit, is beginning to address Mexican concerns that we have long ignored, particularly the flow of U.S. firearms to armed cartels and fuel violence within Mexico. This significant U.S.-Mexico cooperation is why it's so alarming that President Trump continues to float the idea of unilateral U.S. military strikes in Mexico, including as recently as last week. And this isn't hypothetical. On October 27th, the U.S. military conducted a strike off Mexico's coast, an operation the administration has refused to explain to Congress in detail. And let me be clear, this would be a betrayal of a partner and a catastrophic mistake. There is no path to defeating the cartels without Mexican cooperation. Unilateral force would destroy that cooperation overnight. And President Trump must take this reckless option off the table. Beyond Mexico, this administration has launched lethal military operations in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific aimed, by its own admission, at destabilizing the Maduro regime. These strikes have no legal justification and no transparency. Just yesterday, the President announced a naval blockade of Venezuela, unquestionably an act of war that the Congress has never voted to authorize. And later today, the House will vote on a war powers resolution to direct the President to end hostilities with Venezuela. And I hope a majority of this body will vote to reassert Congress's constitutional authority. Before I close, I want to address the State Department directly. This is the least transparent department that I've seen during my time in Congress. Basic questions go unanswered by people in both parties. There's no consultation before major policy changes. And this committee is still waiting for responses on foreign assistance to Haiti, INL funding in El Salvador, and other critical issues. If today's hearing signals a willingness by the department to engage with the Congress, then that must be followed by immediate action, starting with overdue answers to the questions members of this committee have raised for months. The stakes in this hemisphere are enormous, and we need a foreign policy that treats our neighbors as partners, not as pawns. Now I yield back.
Thank you to the ranking member. With that, I'll do my closing statements as well as for our conclusion for the hearing. You know, a lot of people want to talk about the trajectory shift into the Western Hemisphere as a focus, but it's always been a key focus. The issue is that we've had certain areas which has kind of been a vacuum in the room in the Middle East, which has been a continuous powder keg waiting to explode. But Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea's geopolitical alignment has always been very much focused on the Western Hemisphere. Yes, we understand China's Belt and Road Initiative's initial intent, which was the Eurasian expansion, domination of Africa with 15 of 16 rare earth mineral mines, and also taking over of Oceania. That was to block off Western Hemisphere supply chain through the Horn of Africa, Red Sea, Persian Gulf, Black Sea. But what we also noticed was a growing threat, whether that be from the Chavez Maduro regime, the extension into Pedro in Colombia, the economic coercion by China and the CCP on Honduras and Panama, so they could once again try and shut off and take control of taxation, tariff, trade, and passage through the canal, which President Trump recognized very early on. But also the growing threat of China growing one of the largest military training bases and spy bases in Cuba, only 90 miles off of my coast in the great state of Florida. We know that Western Hemisphere must be a key focus. We know that the fentanyl opioid trade and the designation of the cartels as a terrorist organization is long overdue. We can see the impact that the State Department, INL, and all of our DEA and law enforcement partners, to include our Border Patrol, has made in trying to stop the illicit trafficking of not just drugs or the illicit money laundering, but the human trafficking of women and children. I want to thank our witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members who had their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond these in writing. Pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitations. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.